So, Dukes, you said something interesting when you were talking about like how non-blue decks are kind of at a disadvantage. When we were talking, while you just recorded your banner restricted take, and I kind of wanted to get in the head of the non-blue player for a minute, and here you are, and so you were speaking about the disadvantage that non-blue players have.
Yeah, I think that if you are registering, say, a green-white deck in Legacy, especially one that doesn't have sort of an I win button in, say, Dark Depths, or if you're playing sort of Creative Control with Natural Order, you do have to realize that you have done that, and you are, in some ways, putting yourself at a disadvantage and bringing, in my words, you're bringing a knife to a gunfight in terms of what Legacy has to offer, and that you're bringing, say, green-white Maverick compared to blue-black Tempo or
You can still kill a guy with a
other
knife.
combo deck. You can, and that's the challenge that I love. I'm not saying that like a 5-0 in a league with Maverick is worth more than say like a 5-0 with Tempo or something, but I really love that challenge of like the one hand behind your back in a fight. But I do also understand that with that comes some pretty awkward moments where it's like you do feel underpowered, but it's up to you to really just make sure that like your 75 is as clean as possible in terms of what you believe you're going to face. And I think that potentially over the last few months, I've been a bit too stuck on the same 75 and probably not innovating as much as other players have within sort of the green-white space, which is great to see within the Maverick Discord, a very active and community-driven Discord.
3-for-1 Trading is buying all Magic the Gathering singles and entire collections, big and small.
They're one of the top trading card game traders, buying way over 1 million Magic cards a year, and they are more than happy to make an offer on your cards.
In addition to sending in your cards, you'll also have a chance to sell and trade with them at MagicCon Las Vegas, taking place from June 20th to 22nd.
You can support the channel by using the link 341.gg/sell-ed.
Huge thanks to 3-for-1 Trading for supporting the Legacy community. Now back to the show.
Have you seen any new cards in the last, like, let's say, you haven't been on since 2 banner restricted announcements ago? I think you took a break for a while. But have you seen any new cards that, like, really shine for you since the last 6 months, let's say?
Skythcat Cub is pretty cool. I think I knocked off Skythcat Cub a little bit too quick because John Stern in 2013 at a Legacy SCG Open deck tech, he talked about Tarmogoyf in Maverick and how it got pushed out because it was just a beater. It wasn't disruption. It was just pressure. And I felt like that when I saw Skythcat Cub. But I do like that Cub is disruption in the way that if your opponents have Bowmasters to answer your Thalias or Mother of Runes, but you now have a way to actually make them X2s, that is in some way disruption. And it is also a threat that can get out of hand pretty quickly. So if it does get taken down by a Fatal Push, that of course is one less other threat that is going to get taken down. So it can be a bit of a removal magnet, which is nice. And it's really cool to see some of the different decks that are playing it, not just Maverick, but some Cradle Control, some sort of green-white lands or depths versions, which is cool.
I saw you post about it the other day. How do you feel about Tifa?
Yes, I got hammered by a Tifa. I had a Marit Legion play. Correct. I was at 8 life. I had a Marit Legion play. I blocked, and it was a 46. So pretty crazy. That was a really cool deck. That was just a quick like landfall deck being played by Sivivatu. I believe they're a Japanese Delver player. They stream. And I think they're just like testing out this deck, but it was like a Naya landfall deck, which looked really cool.
That feels like possible Maverick wheelhouse. Like you've got crop rotations.
Yeah, I think if you did do a version with crop rotation, that could be something to do with the meta as well. Like if you do want access to Bajuka Bog early on, then crop rotation is a great way to do it instead of having to rely on Knight or if you're incorporating Elvish Reclaimer. But yeah, I think the biggest issue that I have with Green White and Mav recently is just drawing the right side of the deck. Because, there are games where, as a really simple example, drawing 3 Swords of Plowshares against Ant, or drawing your Collector Oof against Elves. There's just not too much you can do about it. But there are ways to mitigate it a little bit, like with the Collector Oof against Elves example, you now have Grist, which can get rid of the Oof, which can trade with an opposing threat. So there are ways you can like make use of them, which is nice. I did see there was a kind of new Ponder, which I believe is green. Look at the top 3, put a land creature or I'm going to say enchantment in your hand. You can't like shuffle or put them back, but it was kind of interesting. But at the same time, there's also that mix of like fluff. So like Green Suns, Once Upon a Time, and then also like enough lands for another Reliquary, enough creatures for Green Suns.
Yeah.
It's really hard to make that a decision on what to cut for those sort of cards.
It unrelated to that, it does feel like Maverick's spot in the metagame, because it used to be like combo beats Maverick, the fair decks, right? Beats Delver, beats combo, right? And it feels like now that specifically the blue-black decks that have upgraded their threat base a lot, right? Those Delver is not even played in these decks anymore. It feels like the threats that Maverick is playing against the fair combo killer decks, the Delver style decks, don't really keep up. Do you think maybe like there's space and design to like upgrade the threats in Maverick?
It would be cool, especially ones that can't be splashed for too easily, like a green-white card or a double green card. Like Keen-Eyed Curator, I think, is a fantastic card. And it's kind of taking the spot of Scavenging Ooze because it's a lot easier to become a threat, and life gain isn't as relevant as it sometimes is.
White of the Reliquary comes to mind.
White of the Reliquary is very cool as well. I haven't played with it enough to really understand how good it is, because a lot of the creature decks that I play, I find that each creature has a pretty specific role. So you don't just want to like throw away your creatures to find lands. You might want to build around it with things like Grist, getting rid of insects, great. Bowmaster, getting rid of the token, great. Springheart Nantuku, getting rid of the insects, great. But like, getting rid of like a Knight or a Thalia, you might just be a little bit in an awkward spot where they might still be relevant in some cases. But it's great to see Newton and the team with like Cradle Control obviously taking white and making full use of it.
With the recent blue splash for the Green Suns decks where they're playing what's called Nadu, do you think that's kind of like truncating the space for what's playable in the archetype?
Yeah, it's there's always that opinion of like, if you're playing, say, if Grixis Tempo was much better than blue-black, like why not just play Grixis at that point? And there is a point around like, say, Bant Maverick, where it is a Maverick deck with, I know Lavinia has been getting some airtime, and Unsettled Mariner, I believe the other one, whenever you're targeted, it kind of counters things. But it's a case of, is that better than just playing Bant Nadu? And typically it's not, which is tricky because I would find Nadu quite challenging in that it's a very hard deck to keep up with once it starts going, and you do have to respect the combo. And with decks like Nadu and Oops, and obviously Reanimate in the format, Grafdigger's Cage has become pretty synonymous with the format, and so that's a card that just does hit Green Sun Zenith, which is kind of tough.
Incidentally,
but I think as threats diverse as well, so say Cutter now in blue-red or blue-red Delver as an example, it's really tough to be able to like, you don't want to bring in Force of Vigors because that's really narrow and they might not even draw the Cutter, but it makes you think more about cards like Prismatic Ending, which can at least hit the Cutter, but it could also hit a DRC, but it can't hit Murktide. But if they bring like a Grafdigger's Cage, then at least you have an answer for that potentially. So I think that's also a tough thing for Maverick, is making sure that you really know what you're going to play against or what you think you're going to play against, and just kind of have more generic answers, which might not be as powerful as some of the silver bullets you can have, but it does give you a bit of game to just have an answer for something and not be like, oh, well, game 2, I didn't bring in any artifact hate and I didn't see Cutter game 1, and now I can't really deal with this threat on the board.
Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield.com. Moxfield is the best deck building website on the internet. You can find all of my and Phil's decks in links below, including decks from this episode. And if you do, you'll be directly supporting the channel.
Yeah. It's funny thinking about how, Phil's trivialities with the format, where his Miracles deck is often in the same sort of hole that Maverick gets put in. And you have to wonder, is that the choice of deck, or is it just like, every now and again, who knows? He's at the local tonight. He 4-0'd the local last week. Great. But sometimes he just hits 7-7-7 and everything comes up right for him, and he has like a run. Do you feel like that with Maverick, where like every now and again you just slot in and everything rolls?
Yeah, I would say, especially with experience with the deck, that's something that can't really be I don't think it's appreciated as much as it potentially used to, but it does take a bit of time to really just understand what you're doing in each matchup, and how it's not a case of just cookie cutter sort of sideboarding, which it is like for most Magic matchups. It's really about like how the opponent plays, or like how aggressive they are, or how maybe they sideboarded in game 2 that you want to respond in game 3. And I think that it's tough because Mav is probably not a deck most people are going to give new players as like, hey, you should enter the format with Maverick. I think
I was
like
actually going to say,
Delver is probably a great way to enter.
you know, would you ask somebody as they're starting the format, like, is this a good deck to start off with?
I think if I knew they played it like a green-white creature deck in Modern, then I'd be like, you might enjoy Maverick. But also know that like blue is probably where you're going to be in terms of like learning the format, learning what to like force, what to bolt, like your threats. Like it can be tricky. And I think that Mav does take a fair bit to get the wins going. That maybe a lot of players drop off and move over to other decks that
that's also sort
aren't
of
necessarily
the entry point to Legacy to begin with. Is like a lot of times people just outskill you for a very long time, and then you kind of like understand how the format works. So adding that on top of like, you know, the entry point to Legacy can be tough.
Yeah, I've definitely lent out a few decks, and then when they've come back to give me the decks at the end of the night and I'm still playing my match, I'll finish it and they'll be like, man, you play Legacy and you chose to play like Garotig or like Scavenging Ooze. It's like, yeah, it's a fair day's work, but I really enjoy it. And I think that's the thing. I think you just got to make sure that you're enjoying what you're playing as well.
Yeah.
Because although, say, Delver might be the deck that's going to give you more consistent results than Maverick, if you really enjoy creature decks, Maverick's great. And it's really like, it's a great feeling to kind of play that turn where you like, I have to get down Garotig this turn so they can't natural order the next turn or something like that. And when that works out, you can feel quite.
I found that for when I take a person who plays Standard and I hand them like Delver or something like that, and they get to brainstorm fetch for the first time, that's like that's the drug, you know, like that's the first one's free, you know. Is there a play like that in Maverick?
I think like some of the more, I would say like the unfair thing that Maverick has is mana acceleration, which not a lot of decks have access to. So having like turn 1, say Noble Hierarch, and then turn 2 Thalia Wasteland is always a great feeling. Or even like turn 2 Knight as a 4/4 against a Bolt deck, and then you have access to like Wasteland the following turn. Or it's tough because I feel like, you know, Garotig against Ant or Miracles isn't sort of the lock it used to be. Sadly, like 10 years ago. And Collector Oof even isn't as much of as a lock as it used to be because of things like Urza Saga just making big constructs. The amount of times against Painter where I've had the turn 2 Oof, which is fantastic, but then that I've had, you know, 4/4 or 5/5 constructs where I have to chump at one point with this Oof, and then they just get to go back to, you know, normal. So there's definitely less free wins with the deck, which is tough because especially for returning players who are used to like the turn 2 Teague, or, you know, seeing Collector Oof and being like, wow, if I get this down against an artifact deck, how can they get there? They can, and they probably will. You need to like make sure that you're not just relying on one threat or piece of disruption. You're just applying more and more different ways.
Final thoughts. Do you plan on going to Eternal Weekend this year?
Not this year, sadly. I just have too much actual holiday to have any extended leave. But Japan is a 9-hour or 8 to 9 hour direct flight, which is really cool. So I have played in a GP there, which was Legacy GP Shizuoka in 2018. And then I have also played a God of Legacy over there, which is very cool. And it would be great to play a Eternal Weekend there as well. I've had a few friends do it and said it was an amazing experience. Playing in Japan especially is a really special experience because you realize how much Magic is a universal language.
Yeah, I always say this when I go to another country. Yeah, it's wild. Like you can just from the state of the board and the cards, like you realize that you can just communicate with somebody just with the game.
Yes, at the Legacy GP, I think it was maybe the last round, I was playing against Eldrazi, and in game 2, I had a Pithing Needle, and I was trying to tell my opponent Ratchet Bomb, but they also played Walking Ballista, and I couldn't like tell them what it was, so I had to like call a judge and then like get them over and they would tell them what it was. But it was just funny for the first few seconds of us trying to like understand. Like I was saying Ratchet Bomb, they thought it was Walking Ballista, and I was like, let's just get a judge and we'll But very clean. Like there's some small things. Like I love that they show their 15 card sideboard for games, and then when they sideboard, they then show they've still got 15 in the sideboard. Small
you don't
things
have
like
to do that anymore. You can sideboard in all 75 cards if you want to.
Yes.
We're thinking about maybe next year doing Japan. So it'd be cool to have you, get an IRL with you for once. You know.
That would be very cool. I only have one trip planned next year, so hopefully that would be very nice.
Yeah. Well, Dukes, I appreciate you coming on, just to get a quick taste of what's going on with Maverick right now. And we discussed earlier, we want to have you and a couple of the other guys that play Maverick, that play those Green Sun style decks, to come on and give us a real like crunchy episode. But I really appreciate you coming on, man.
You're welcome. A big shout out to Achilles27, who recently came top 8 with Maverick, which is great in a Legacy challenge. To Mark Strassman, of course, who streams Maverick pretty constantly. And then, the Maverick Discord is very active, polite, positive, community driven, even in times where Maverick maybe isn't, in the top tiers of Legacy.
All right. Well, thanks for having us. Or thanks for having us. Thanks for coming on. Think your Legacy or pre-modern deck is the truth?
Or total garbage? We'll play it either way.
Join our donation deck Patreon tier.
Choose Zach or Phil to run your deck through a league and maybe, probably, definitely, most maybe even win every single game.
Go to patreon.com/eternaldurdles.